Welcome to Swing State, our weekly look at what's going on in the world of politics and how it all affects you. I'm your host, Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley. Now, the last 2 weeks, we've had Republican gubernatorial candidates Bill Graham and Dale Folwell on our program, and we felt we needed to let you know that we told the man leading in most polls, Republican Mark Robinson, that he could come in any day at any time, and we would give him the same full half hour, and in the end, the Robinson team declined our invitation. But we have a great show for you anyway, with political scientist John Dinan of Wake Forest University and Hunter McCoe of UNC Greensboro. Welcome, gentlemen. You know, a lot to talk about here. And let's begin, though, with that governor's race. How do you see this race shaping up in the primary on Tuesday and then in the general in the fall?
The two favorites, I think, are going to walk away with it, both Stein and Robinson. I think they're going to do well in their primaries. The interesting thing about the Republican primary is typically Republicans are physically oriented, and Folwell's got no traction against Robinson, which demonstrates how powerful of a candidate he is.
And you say that when you say fiscally oriented because he's sort of the fiscal candidate as our state treasurer,
Correct.
Dale Folwell. Yeah. How do you see it, John?
I mean, Folwell has the most experience of anyone, and in previous days we might value experience in primaries, put someone in who's held statewide office, who's held state legislative office. That's not what counts the most these days, and Mark Robinson has clear name recognition advantage, he has clear endorsement advantage, he has a strong advantage.
This shows how the parties have changed. I mean, the Republican establishment, the pre-Trump Republican Party would love a guy like Folwell, and to some degree even a Bill Graham, but they're completely switched.
One of the challenges is when you're a primary voter, you can think along a dimension of which candidate comes closest to my passionate views, or two, which candidate do I think would be the best general election candidate in November. Voters do not do as much thinking about that second as they do about the first. Mark Robinson's almost certain to be the nominee.
That's certainly not in primaries, they don't. We have some numbers on this. Let's take a look at some of the poll numbers. Robinson above 50% to Graham's 13 and Folwell's 7. Pretty, you know, polls may not be what they used to be, but they're not going to be off by that much. And in head-to-head, I have one where we have Stein and Robinson essentially tied in the general election head-to-head likely matchup, whereas Bill Graham is -2 against Josh Stein and Folwell is -4. So all of those look pretty good for the Republican Party. Any one of them has a shot. But really, Robinson, not the shot Republicans think he has.
Well, I don't know. I think Robinson's going to be a formidable opponent. I think it's going to be a barn burner of election with Stein and Robinson coming into it.
Key point is Republicans have the advantage in North Carolina in national elections. Republicans clearly have the advantage in presidential elections. They have the advantage in Senate elections. A marginal advantage, but an advantage. Republicans do not have the advantage in gubernatorial elections. It shows that you can still have a split electorate, that voters can be thinking about one thing when they're electing voters for candidates for national office, and think of another thing when thinking of statewide office. Democrats have historically had the advantage in the governor's race.
32 years for governor's races, one Republican, Pat McCrory, but 48 years, we're going to talk about this a little later, where only in the last 48 years has one Democrat won the presidential race in this state. It's crazy. Attorney General, I don't know that a Republican has won in more than 100 years.
No. And that says something voters still think about. They filter through state elections in a different way than they do national elections.
Are you saying our voters think? It really sounds like it. They're thinking about this.
For many other elections, voters are down the line. They're going to cast a straight party ticket for president, for Senate. The one place where they deviate from that is in governor and some other statewide elections, such as lieutenant governor and attorney general. That's the one place where voters, I'm going to evaluate candidates on their own merits, not only whether they have an R&D next to their name.
Let's talk a little bit about the General Assembly. And the Republicans have had a veto-proof majority for a while, which really has diluted Governor Roy Cooper's effect in the last 8 years. The Democrats are desperate to break that. What are the chances? Are the Democrats going to get over that hump?
I don't think so. I think we'll probably end up in the same situation we are now, because one thing we do have is a popular governor, Democrat Cooper. And I think that's the only way the Republicans will maintain their power, is to maintain that majority.
You know, we have a new districts that are drawn up this year. We draw up districts pretty frequently in North Carolina, and we've drawn them up again. Yep. Republicans have a bare supermajority in both the House and Senate. They could not afford to lose a vote. District lines are redrawn. District lines are drawn up by Republicans, and there was no challenge to that from the state Supreme Court. So Republicans had the best conditions for drawing them up. Presumably, they're hoping that if everything goes well, that they can stay a status quo of where they are now. There's not much margin to spare, though. They lose a vote from there, they lose the veto-proof majority, and that is everything in that sense in terms of getting Democrats to the table for bargaining.
Right. And if I can, the enthusiasm Trump's going to bring to the state is going to be something that's going to help these local elections as well.
But, you know, as you mentioned, whatever party's in power draws them to get as many of their guys in and as few of the other guys. Speaking of which, there's a guy named Wiley Nickel, whose name you might have heard. Wiley Nickel is a congressman from the southern part of Raleigh down to Fayetteville, the 13th district. He's on a national tour on what he's calling his Fair Maps for North Carolina. He has a bill in Congress that is trying to take the ability to write or to draw districts out of the hands of every General Assembly and give it to independent commissions. Wiley Nickel was in Greensboro kicking off that tour to push this legislation the other day. Here's what he had to say. Here's how he described it.
You look to other, every state's going to do it slightly differently, but what you do is you look to the successful states where they keep communities of interest together, they keep counties, cities together. You want to make sure you're giving minority communities of color equal opportunity to have the representative of their choice. That's something that's been a big part of the Voting Rights Act. And what we see, with successful litigation in other states in the South.
So 95% of people, I would argue, will agree with that, and 100% of legislatures in power will say, we don't care.
And that is the key point. Legislators are the ones that, for the most part, control whether you get a redistricting commission. In the states that have gotten redistricting commission, it has almost always been because there's a voter initiative process, which is not present in North Carolina, that forces it on the legislature. Virginia is a rare exception, where Virginia, the legislators agreed to it on themselves. The odds that a legislature voluntarily gives up that power are highly low.
That's why Nickel's trying to do it federally, kind of over their heads. You see this ever happening, Hunter?
No, not with this Supreme Court and not with any Supreme Court, because they relegate it to the states.
With the U.S. Supreme Court, you mean?
Yes,
because
correct.
You've got a Republican Supreme Court here, too, so you've got a double wall there for the Republicans to lay back on.
Well, in that case, it really makes no difference who draws the maps.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the congressional... By the way, before I do that, though, the supermajority, talking about that, if Mark Robinson becomes governor, the supermajority doesn't matter as much.
The reason why this is relevant is if Democrats hold on to the governorship, that is important as to whether Republicans keep a supermajority. If they don't, that gives Democrats a place at the table still.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about the congressional 6th district. There's there's 6 Republicans running for that office, and there is no Democrat. That's part of what we're going to talk about here in a minute. We have just a few seconds before we go to break. I mean, not having a Democrat in that race, that's not ideal.
Democrats did a very good job of putting up seats for state legislative races this year. They did not do the same job on the congressional level. They basically ceded this race to Republicans.
Yeah, Hunter, is that not malpractice? Every party should put up a major party should put up a candidate.
When the districts are drawn the way they are, though, Bob, that's not going to be possible. This district is pretty much a Republican district, so it really makes no sense for a Democrat to jump in.
All right. The big prize, of course, is the presidential race. North Carolina continues to be a battleground, but could this be the year that a third party breaks through? We haven't seen a situation as favorable probably in our lifetimes. We'll break that down next.
Of course, all anyone has been talking about today, FanDuel is heading to North Carolina.
FanDuel is going live soon.
FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, is headed to North Carolina.
Oh, yeah, I'm feeling it. FanDuel in North Carolina? Fun is about to begin, everybody. I'm pumped.
Let's go, North Carolina.
America's #1 sportsbook is coming soon to North Carolina. Get up to $300 of bonus bets when you sign up today.
Change is never easy. There will be naysayers, doubters, and critics. You may even give up for a moment, only to start again another day. Because you believe in moving to the beat of your own drum, in passing down lifelong skills, in your ability to lose weight and keep it off. And when you believe you can succeed, you already have.
Wegovy is for adults with obesity and shouldn't be used with semaglutide or GLP-1 medicines. Don't take Wegovy if you or your family had medullary thyroid cancer, multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, or if allergic to it. Stop Wegovy and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may happen, including pancreatitis and gallbladder problems. Wegovy may cause low blood sugar in people with type 2 diabetes, especially if you take medicines to treat type 2 diabetes. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes, or if you feel your heart racing while at rest. Depression or thoughts of suicide may occur. Call your provider right away if you have any mental changes. Common side effects like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea may lead to dehydration, which may cause kidney problems.
So keep on believing, because it's not just about the weight you lose. It's about everything you gain. Believe on Wegovy.
Step back in time with a visit to Gibsonville Antiques and Collectibles. With over 18,000 square feet of unique finds, glassware, furniture, art, model trains, and everything in between. You'll find it all at Gibsonville Antiques and Collectibles, behind the Red Caboose in downtown Gibsonville.
At Truliant, we're with you at every milestone, making it easier for you to shine. So you can saddle up each morning for more than a paycheck. Have the support to expand your horizon, the space to grow your family, and your brightest dreams never have to fade. At Truliant, we help you shine. That's brighter banking. Truliant Federal Credit Union.
Welcome back to Swing State. I'm Bob Buckley. With me tonight are political scientist Hunter Bacow of UNC Greensboro and Wake Forest John Dineman. Now, gentlemen, before we get to the presidential race, I want to go over the big race congressionally. That is the 6th district, the only one that really looks like it's going to be a challenge. And that is the other ones, though, that are out there. The North Carolina 5th district is sort of the north and west part of our viewing areas. Virginia Fox, she's an incumbent. And the North Carolina 9th district, which is sort of the east and down to the south, is Richard Hudson. He is an incumbent. Of course, you've got an open seat in the 10th where Patrick McHenry is retiring after spending, 3 weeks as Speaker of the House. That opens up a big opportunity for some Republican, because that's, again, heavily drawn for a Republican. And so that leaves us with the 6th here. 6 candidates, of which 4 have a pretty good shot to get in the runoff. How do you see the 6th district race shaping up?
You rarely see races and primary races where you have a number of candidates, each with their own strong basis of support. You have one candidate who held the seat before, Mark Walker. You have another candidate, Christian Castelli, who ran for the seat before. You have another candidate, Addis McDowell, who's endorsed by President Trump. Then you got another candidate, Bo Hines, who was endorsed by President Trump for a previous office.
And people still think he is. Still think he's the one.
And who is also backed by Club for Growth and has a lot of money. So it's rare to see 4 candidates, each with their own strong basis of support. It's one of the reasons why we think that there's a possibility of one candidate not getting to the 30% threshold and therefore leading to a runoff among the top 2.
There's also Jay Wagner, who is the former mayor of High Point, who has a decent following. Dr. Marianne Contagianis, who's probably going to struggle a little bit in this race, but tell me how you feel about this race, Hunter.
This is going to be a primary, a runoff anyway, because you have so many candidates, like John was saying, that are going to bring up a significant number of voters. And they, like you said, they each breaking off in their own little area. It's going to be interesting to see how the dynamics break down with the constituency. And that's going across those counties. That's going to be important.
All right, well, it certainly doesn't get any bigger than the public housing that's issued at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Barack Obama is the only Democrat to win the state in the last 48 years, and he barely won it. He squeaked by in 2008, but didn't win it in 2012. Does Joe Biden stand a chance to gain our sizable electoral vote count this year?
There's always a chance, and there's particularly a chance.
It does have a good chance.
There's always a chance because they have narrowed the gap between the advantage that Republicans traditionally held. That being said, almost everything has to be right, and every condition has to be in place for Democrats to win the presidency of North Carolina. The most important thing, though, is Democrats don't really have to win North Carolina. If Democrats have won North Carolina, they have already won enough other states to get to the majority of the Electoral College. So it's the gravy on top. For Republicans, they need North Carolina. It's very difficult to see Republicans winning the presidency without winning North Carolina.
What do you think, Hunter?
Trump's going to win North Carolina.
By a lot. He barely squeaked by in 20.
Well, he's going to win North Carolina. I don't know about the margin of victory. It'll probably be because there's so many people disaffected with Biden, and he's incumbent. That kind of negates his advantage there. So I think Trump's going to come back, and he's going to come back with a vengeance. He's been in the state many times.
Yeah, and he's going to be in all through the summer. We have all seen the polls that say 70% of the electorate does not want to see either of these guys run, and they don't want to see a rematch. If we've ever seen a chance in our lifetimes for a third party to break through, you think this might be it. I put that question to Chris Stirewalt, who is News Nation's political guru, brilliant guy, knows about as much about this as anyone I know. Here's what he said about a third party possibly winning or making a big effect in this election at the presidential level.
North Carolina is a perfect example of a state where if No Labels put a squishy centrist ticket together, it would probably be very appealing. There's a lot of votes in Mecklenburg County. There's a lot of votes in the Research Triangle. There's a lot of votes around the state that would love to park a protest vote. That would be great news for Joe Biden. So right there in North Carolina, where, by the way, No Labels is on the ballot. Another consequential third-party candidate, probably more consequential, would be if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can convince the Libertarian Party to give him their ballot access. That would be big trouble for Donald Trump, because RFK's appeal is the same sort of disaffected, fed up, outsider, angry voters that Donald Trump has made his stock in trade.
So what would happen? And is there any chance for a third party ever to break through? If we don't like what's out there, are we going to still choose it?
Third parties will poll well. They traditionally poll well early in the campaign when folks are signaling, I'm open to a third party. The challenge is whether third parties sustain those numbers going into the final week of actual voting. There are so many barriers against third parties doing well. If there is a time when a third party might have a significant showing, these conditions are ripe for that. It still is the case that the odds are against a third party having a significant showing.
What do you think? Any shot?
There's a shot, and the only reason I would even say there's a shot is because the unfavorability of these two candidates, they're both in the high 50s, which is highly unusual. And so I think if there's a possibility it could be this election, but then we know that varies based on the third party. It's going to be a third party that gathers a lot of votes, or a third party is just going to make a little bit of a wrinkle or a dent.
You know, because Perot got almost 20% in 1992, and neither of those candidates were nearly as disliked as these two.
No.
You know, Joe Manchin, Nikki Haley? What do you think? No?
Again, we're most likely talking about what percentage of the vote a third-party candidate gets rather than whether a third-party candidate wins. And then we're talking about who that third-party candidate takes the most votes for.
Right.
And that is the key question. And you can make a case that third-party candidates are going to draw from otherwise Biden voters. You can also make a case that they can draw from Trump voters. The polling has been different, but it's not yet clear that it's a clear advantage for one candidate or the other having third-party candidates in the race.
And that's key. The level of preference for these two is pretty low. So I think it's the landscape is there to entertain a third party. If it could happen, it would happen, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it depends on which one it is, too, I guess. The primary process is part of our problem here, right? Because it takes the extremes of each party who don't care about who can win. They simply want a purist.
You know, the primary process has developed over many decades. There is a lot of reason for being unhappy with the primary process as it sets out. There's no doubt that a lot of folks took a look and say we would have a better general election candidate than the Republicans other than Donald Trump. There's a lot of reason to believe on the Democratic side that there could be folks who would be a better general election candidate than Joe Biden. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are almost certain to emerge, both of them, from our primary process. That's the nature of our process as long as we stick with that current process.
But this has only been the process for about 50 years. People don't realize that.
But it still doesn't jive with things because the person who's going to win the election is going to approach the center. And so that takes it away. That takes it out of the equation with these primaries. And so you have to, that's where the parties come in and try to weed out before it ever gets to the primaries.
Have you guys noticed what the biggest issues are? What do you think? Because we've got something coming up in the next block. We're going to talk about what the biggest issues are from polling. What do you guys see as the biggest issues?
It's inflation.
You think?
Yeah.
With immigration rising up the ranks in a way that we usually do not see immigration issues and border issues as high as it is, a lot of events are propelling that. If Republicans have a good year, it's because immigration is front and center and inflation. If Democrats have a good year, it's because abortion is front and center.
Right. Abortion was a stronger issue than a lot of people realize going to the last stand. But, you know, when you say inflation and immigration, you see a lot of Democrats, including the president, doing la, la, la. They don't want, that's not what they want to hear. Those are two of the worst issues.
Well, where we are, the immigration doesn't, we don't live and see it. But with the inflation, we live and see it.
It's getting here, though. It is. All right. So still more tonight, including why you may have changed parties. Yeah, you. Both the Republicans and Democrats don't look like they used to. How they've changed and why. Next.
I'm Bo Hines, and I approve this message.
Now, more than ever, we need America First leadership in Congress. We need to secure the border, deport the millions who come to our country illegally, stop the terrible trade deals with China, and protect North Carolina workers. Bo Hines is a conservative fighter that will close the border and be President Trump's #1 ally in Congress.
Bo Hines is here. He's going to be a congressman very shortly. Bo Hines.
This happens every day in America. This day, it happened to me. Next time it could be you. The best decision I ever made was calling Rome Law. And yes, that was me on the motorcycle.
If you've been hurt, call Rome Law.
Hey Hey, Joe, who installed your roof?
ProCover.
And your new windows?
ProCover.
What about the siding?
ProCover.
And the gutters?
ProCover. Where are you going?
I'm going to call ProCover.
When it comes to fortifying your home, insist on perfection.
Call ProCover today for a safer tomorrow.
Deep breath in and out. Talk to your doctor about hitting those high notes, about not acting your age.
Can my heart take double overtime?
Whew. Talk to your doctor, Steve. Yes, you'll want to talk about that too.
How many glasses of water?
Yeah, don't ask me. Ask your doctor. Talk to your Cone Health primary care doctor about whatever. Because if you're talking, you're increasing your chances of living a healthier life. Go to conehealth.com/primary care to find a doctor today.
At Jason Ross Auto Sales, trucks are back. If you're looking to buy a truck this year, look no further. We have a great selection of quality pre-owned trucks, all Carfax certified with no accidents. And at the home of no hidden fees, you know you're getting a good truck deal. Call, go online, or stop by to check out our inventory of trucks today. The trucks you want at prices you can afford from a name you can trust. Jason Ross Auto Sales in Burlington.
Greensboro, max your ride with Cross Max Purple. It's GTA's first crosstown transit route that offers a new direct connection between East and West Greensboro. Cross Max Purple has 15-minute frequencies, reducing your wait time, moving you to entertainment, employment, education, and more. Also, it's a one-seat ride, no changing buses. Best of all, Cross Max Purple is fare-free for the first week. Get more information at ridegta.com. That's ridegta.com. Come match your ride with the new Cross Max Purple from GTA.
Welcome back to Swing State. I'm Bob Buckley, along with political scientist John Dinan of Wake Forest University and Hunter Bacow of UNC Greensboro. Gentlemen, it ain't your mama's Democratic Party nor your daddy's Republican Party these days. We have had some hard numbers we have coming up here on how partisan party membership has changed over the last 8 years. Before we get to that, let's talk about the issues that are probably going to decide this race. A lot of times it's a mishmash, but I think there are 2 or 3 major issues that really stand out above the others. Look at some numbers here. In fact, when people were asked what are the most important issues, we're combining here people who said it's very or somewhat important on these numbers. Inflation at 91%, national security, and I think they sort of lumped immigration in with that 91%, school safety 90%, nothing else even close to that, including abortion way down the list, and climate change is actually at the bottom of the list of things that affect people. Will these things, those issues, affect this race more than any others? They've got to, right?
You know, it's always pocketbook issues are always front and center. And that is, how's the economy doing? How do I feel like I'm doing under the economy? You can go both ways on that, but the general public is not feeling overall enthused about the economy. So that's tough for an incumbent president. Your fate rests a lot on the degree of the economy. So that's a tough one. Biden's going to continue to make the case the economy is looking better than you think, but a lot of people don't think it's looking good.
And here's a rare case. We have 2 essentially incumbents. You both have a record as president to deal with, but I think this is a tougher slate to ride for President Biden.
Oh, I agree. These are both Republican issues, and they should take them home, and I'm sure they will. The inflation, that's something, like I said earlier, that hits home. I mean, your steak is more, your milk is more, and so you carry that home and you live with that daily. With the national security, that's something a little bit more esoteric for the average voter. So you feel the inflation. So the economy, as John said, is strong, but the inflation is what's affecting the individual person.
And here in this state, inflation may not be as bad as other places. Our economy is good in this state, and immigration hasn't affected us to the degree it has others. But all these governors are saying now we're all border states. That's an effective line.
Events and news events have led immigration to be a prominent issue, not just in border states, but all over the country. And it remains the case that Republicans will want the election waged on issues such as inflation and immigration. Democrats will want the election waged on abortion and perhaps gun safety and gun reform issues to some extent in that way. So elections are not about taking a common set of issues and arguing about those. They're about pushing your issues to the forefront and saying this is the issue that's most important, because each side has favorable issues toward it, and they want the election run on that issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the Republicans are sitting pretty with regard to the immigration and inflation issues. I think the abortion is going to be there. How much traction that gets nationally, comparatively, is going to be difficult to understand.
You know, it's interesting though to see over the last really 20 years how much the parties have changed. I mean, Barack Obama garnered more than 90% of the black vote, and that's very understandable. He was an excellent candidate. He had obviously some certain demographics that were historic on his side. That's begun to flip, and the Democrats have lost 19% of the black support they had before. That's significant. Hispanic, especially working class, are also breaking towards not just Donald Trump, but Republicans, whereas very educated white voters, particularly women, have gone to the Democrats, and I think a lot of that has to do with the abortion issue, too, for the women's side. Although, you know, interestingly enough, men are as likely or more likely to be pro-choice in most surveys than women. I'm sorry, yeah, pro-choice. What do you make of these changes? It's got to scare both parties, to be honest.
I agree. I think the black vote is something that's going to concern Democrats. They need to hold that vote and hold it strong. The Latino vote is going to be more dynamic based on place and geography because you see Texas and California with different sets of Latino.
Right.
And let me just put one other thing in here. Traditionally, the urban vote has been heavily Democratic. The rural vote has been traditionally Republican, and the election is waged in the suburbs in that way. And you see urban areas become more and more Democratic. You see rural areas becoming more and more Republican. Suburban areas are still torn in both directions. That's why a lot of the candidate visits will take place with an eye towards suburban voters.
And that is an excellent point coming out of the Charlotte region, the way it's grown, and out of Raleigh. So you had the exurbs, those counties around there that were once rural counties that voted solid Republican. You're seeing some changes there.
But here's an interesting dynamic. The African-American contingent of the Democratic Party is now the conservative wing or the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. Overall, they are the most moderate Democrat voters. Isn't that? I think it's a very interesting dynamic.
African-American voters have always been split in terms of their issue positions, and on social and conservative on social issues, there's always been a conservative streak among African-American voters.
What's happened here is the white voters who have gravitated to the Democratic Party tend to be very progressive, and so they've sort of flanked the Democrats and left them. They used to be on the left overall of the Democratic Party. Now they're on the right.
It used to be the case that if you would ask someone one question, know what party they stand for, how much money do you make? That is not a safe question anymore. Now it is seen as a reversal, and it's certainly not the case that if you make more money, you're necessarily Republican in that case. You do see a real realignment. Donald Trump played a key role in that, but he was a part of a broader movement that's bigger than just him, of the parties realigning in ways that we're still shaking out.
Hunter, what do you make of that?
I think the education aspect's overriding because we saw that happen early on in Trump's first election and his first victory where the pollsters missed it by not waiting for education properly. And, you know, education and income are entangled, so trying to disentangle that's tough. And so pollsters finally got it right where we're doing it by education. So I think what you're seeing there is the people evaluating things in a very different cognitive structure as we once saw.
Just a few seconds left, but I want to bring up how, you know, for a couple of decades now, Republicans essentially gave up since Jack Kemp left on blacks and didn't even bother speaking to them, and the Democrats took them for granted.
It is still the case that about 9 out of every 10 black voters will vote Democratic. If just a few percentage point of Democratic voters shift over to Republicans, that has huge implications.
I bet it's bigger this time around.
Well, you got Mark Robinson leading the ticket at the state level, so that's going to be something that's going to help with that vote.
Although Mark Robinson has some things about his background that are going to turn off people in every sector.
That is the question that primary voters are facing in the next few days. In that sense, is how much to weigh his liabilities in a general election versus their passion for what he stands for.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you. That is our show for tonight. Thanks for watching.